Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is the next installment in the incredible series by Jack LaFountain. As ever, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag Team Fear and DMT's Cryptid Crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Death Rides the Red. Let's get straight into that.
They're moving your way, Jimmy. You see 'em? Sure do, Captain. That means they're sending Harmon at us head on, Jack said. Here's what we'll do. I'm going to go down below. Y'all hold Harmon outside for a couple of minutes and then let him in. I'll circle around behind him and put a bullet in the back of his head. Then we'll deal with Hodgkiss. I got torches moving up, Jimmy said. Me too, echoed Nick. A man carrying one of the torches ran from behind the overturned wagon and charged towards Jimmy. The blast from Jimmy's shotgun cut him off at the knees, and the torch rolled through the dried grass. They're going to try and burn us out, Nick said. Maybe, Jack countered. More likely, a diversion to get Harmon inside. Nick and Jimmy fired as rapidly as they could, trying to keep the advancing posse away from the house, but the torches began to find the mark. 2 or 3 landed on the roof and several others ignited the porch. Torches started to fly over the buckboard in front of the house too. The front porch was ablaze. The rising cloud of black smoke blinded the men inside, and flames engulfed the roof and forced the men inside the Lazy L to their bellies to escape the heat. The temperature inside the house climbed steadily, and breathing was difficult. And Jack wet some cloths, which he passed to each man in an attempt to cool them down. The men pulled their bandanas over their faces to keep out the smoke and help them breathe. Change of plans. Give me all those boxes of ammo, and everybody down the hole, Jack ordered. Trust me. Jack piled the cartridges, and Jimmy's shotgun shells on the table as the others slid beneath the house. Jack covered the ammo with the grease from Jimmy's frying pan. He then used the pan to scoop live coals from the stove and pour them over the growing pile of ammunition on the table. Jack joined the others in the crawl space. The fire blossomed on Nate's table. The flames ignited the ammunition, and the Lazy L ranch house was rocked with the sound of gunfire and stray slugs as the posse neared the walls. Thinking themselves under fire, the posse blindly shot back. The growing volume of gunfire covered a house that streamed through the trees. Amid the gunfire and confusion, no one saw the tall man drop to all fours and charge through the flames and flying bullets. Eamon Hargis hurtled across the blazing porch, stood upright, and kicked open the door. And beneath the house, the heat grew ever more intense. Breathing was an easier way from the billowing smoke, but that would not last long. The 4 decided to hold out under the house as long as possible in the hopes the posse would think they'd died in the flames. And when things got too hot, they would make a run for the barn and the horses. And Nick was first down the hole. Nate handed him the rifles and what little ammunition they had left. Nick pushed everything in front of him as he worked his way forward on his elbows through the dark towards Jack's makeshift door. Nate dropped through the floor next. His eyes still burned and his nose stung from the smoke, more of which drifted down through the floor. The sweat-soaked clothes pasted to his body were no relief from the heat and soon became caked with red Texas clay. And Jimmy followed Nate into the darkness. Halfway through the opening in the floor, Jimmy's shirt caught on a nail that worked loose as the floor warped with the heat. I'm stuck, Jimmy yelled. The front door exploded. The hulking figure of what, at times passed for Eamon Hargis, filled the doorway. Flames crawled up the creature's back and arms, and the smell of burning hair and scorched flesh filled the room. Go, Jimmy, go, Jack said and pushed Jimmy's shoulders down. The nail dug into Jimmy's back and laid open the skin as the kid struggled through the opening. Sweat poured into the open wound with a sharp bite and mingled with the blood that ran down his back. And Jimmy wasted no time with the wound. He had a clear picture in his mind of the thing in the doorway that reduced everything else to nothing. Jack drew from his crouch by the hole and fired. Hodgkiss was faster. The shot went wide and Hodgkiss kept coming. Jack looked at the hole and back to Hodgkiss. He was not going to make it. He fired again, but Hodgkiss dove behind the remnants of the overturned table. A shower of flames and wood and red-hot shell casings erupted from Hodgkiss's refuge and showered down on Jack. Jack fell hard under the burning wreckage. Pain sizzled into Jack's right hand, and his gun dropped to the floor. Jack reached to draw the silver bayonet from his left boot. He knew he would never reach it in time. And Hodgkiss crouched to spring. The air inside the burning room thundered with the blast of Jimmy's shotgun, and Hodgkiss was propelled backwards. "Go!" Jimmy shouted. Jimmy ducked through the narrow door. Jack rolled in after him and slammed the door closed. The fire raged through the house above them, but a greater danger was on the way. Sharp claws scraped against the plank floor and overhead, and the creature's rage brought furniture crashing down on the door and hammering onto the walls. Bits of wall and roof crashed to the floor. The destroyer above growled, snarled, and began to dig at the floor along the path of the retreat. A wild, undulating howl rose from above the men, trapped beneath the floor. It was followed by the crack of lumber. A heavy fist broke through the floor and clawed at the air inches away from Jack's face. The 4 men under the floor scurried out of reach. "We gotta go!" Jack shouted. The fist was withdrawn and malevolent yellow eyes stared down through the opening, and the werewolf began ripping at the planks looking for a way to get at the men below. "Go, Nick, go!" Jack ordered. Nick began to move through the hole in the north wall when reality wavered and floated away. Dan Avery's face dropped into the opening in front of Nick. A huge black hole in Dan's forehead stared out from above his lifeless eyes. "Charge!" Jack screamed. Blood filled Nick's eyes and gore splattered his face. Nick wiped the remnants of Cecil Bray's brains from his eyes. It was still difficult to see, but Nick could make out Yankee cavalry dismounting, and bluecoats quickly blocked the road ahead. Nick fired, and one of the enemy officers fell from his horse. The whole unit charged the enemy line, and Gus Harmon charged ahead and jumped into the empty saddle. Some of the men took repeated hits from the dismounted cavalry's carbines, but they kept on going. The 2 enemies surged against one another. The fighting was close, and then hand to hand. Men from both sides were rolling on the ground, biting, kicking, and clubbing each other with their rifle butts. And still, the unit kept moving forward. Nick shoved the men on, but he found it harder and harder to keep up himself. And he saw Gus Harmon look back at the struggling command. Harmon waved his hat into the air and galloped south. Harmon caught Nick's eye and growled through the opening he had ripped in the floor. Nick snapped back to reality and pushed into the open through the hole in the north wall. He scrambled out of the burning house on hands and knees. Nick got to his feet and turned to help Nate when a slug tore through his thigh. Nick went down in a heap. Nate reached over Nick's fallen body and put a bullet into the forehead of one of Hodgkiss's men. Nate pulled himself free of the house and helped Nick try to stand, but Nick's leg refused to support him. Nate threw a shoulder under Nick's and steadied him as they hobbled towards the barn. "Over here! They're coming on out!" a voice yelled in the dark. Nate shot the voice owner in the chest. Nate and Nick continued hobbling towards the barn. Jack grabbed Jimmy by the shirt and pulled him towards the opening in the wall ahead. The trap door opened behind them and a snarling Gus Harmon dropped through the floor. The size froze Jimmy in place. "Move!" Jack screamed in Jimmy's ear. The command worked and Jimmy's legs began to move again, but he could not match the werewolf's speed. Harmon's claws dug into Jimmy's kicking legs and cut to the bone. and Jimmy screamed in agony and fear as the werewolf tugged him back towards its jaws, and sharp teeth dug through Jimmy's boot and into his foot. He screamed again, and Hodgkiss' claws raked the boy's leg again. Pain shot up Jimmy's side in a bolt of searing, hot lightning. And Jimmy fought his way to freedom, but his face acknowledged surrender to his pending doom. The werewolf pulled Jimmy closer. Jack stuck his Colt up to Harmon's head and pulled the trigger, and Harmon's head slammed into the floor overhead, plastering its contents against the bare wood. The werewolf dropped to the ground, and from the remains of its head, dying jaws continued to snap at the fleeing prey. Jack pulled Jimmy towards the opening and put a second round into Harmon's heart, and Harmon's body leaped in a final convulsion and then was still. Jimmy clawed his way clear of the burning house, dragging his wounded leg, and despite the pain, he climbed to his feet and limped towards the safety of the barn. Nate and Nick provided a cover and fire, and they were holding Hodgkiss' men back, but just barely. And Jack kicked the body of Gus Harmon away to burn under the collapsing house. And despite the burning house above him, Jack's movements were slow and forced. Jack felt that his heart was being ripped apart inside his chest. Tears filled Jack's eyes and rolled down his face. And Jack found the Winchester that Nick had left behind. He took a round from his belt and chambered a silver bullet. A sigh escaped his lips. God forgive me," he whispered. Jack rolled onto his stomach, drew a bead, and shot young Jimmy Weston in the back. The shot caught Jimmy between the shoulder blades and pierced his heart as it exited his chest, and Jimmy fell face down in the Texas dust. Jack was tempted to simply lay back and go to sleep where he was, and he would let the fire do its work and purge this world of its Jack Morgans as it had the werewolf. For a moment, he did just that, welcoming the approaching flames. Whether it was of weakness or strength that finally moved Jack Morgan, he didn't know. Jack crawled from the hole and began to slowly walk for the barn. Tears washed tracks in the spot that covered his cheeks. A large part of him hoped a bullet would end his pain. None did, and as he neared the barn, Nate pulled him inside. Captain Thomas and his Texas Rangers reached Colbert's Ferry as the first rosy fingers of dawn reached up from the horizon. There was not a single Klansman in sight. What Captain Thomas did see was a detachment of the 2nd Cavalry crossing the river. Standing on the south bank, waiting for the soldiers, was a sheriff's deputy. The deputy introduced himself to Captain Thomas as Jason Conroe, and Conroe told the ranger he had been dispatched to Colbert's Ferry by Sheriff Bryan. His job was to lead the soldiers to the Lazy L Ranch and stop John Hodgkiss' interference. And Thomas doubted Bryan acted that far in advance, and he was about to call Conroe a liar when he saw the cavalry detachment was led by a sturdy, red-faced man and with silver eagles on his shoulders. Colonels didn't lead small detachments, even in Indian territory, unless something big was afoot, and he wondered what the hell Bryan and Conroe were up to and why the army even cared. "Colonel Zachary Wise, 2nd Cavalry," the officer said to Thomas. "Captain Seth Thomas, Texas Rangers. Colonel, we're pursuing an armed group of Ku Klux Klan riders. Did you happen to see if they crossed the river?" "Not by this route, Captain. We just ridden south at a buggy depot. The only people we saw were a few Chickasaw policemen." Jason Conroe stepped up to the pair. "Colonel, with your permission, I've been ordered to escort you to the Lazy L Ranch." "Of course, Deputy," Wise replied. "Let's move out." "Colonel, those Klansmen I mentioned were fleeing from the Lazy L. The citizens of Texoma have a band of murderers cornered there, and I've been ordered by Governor Davis to see them brought to justice. The Klan was trying to interfere with the arrest of those men, and since the Klan seems to have eluded us for the moment, I'd like to accompany you back to the Lazy L." "You are welcome to accompany us, Captain. However, you are to leave the situation to me. Are we absolutely clear on that? No, sir, I am not. But if you really want to assume responsibility for sorting out this mess, I'm willing to leave it in your hands. That'll do fine, Captain. Sergeant Morse! Sir! The sergeant snapped to attention. Deputy Conroe is our guide. Move him out! Jason mounted and led the column back along the river route over which Captain Thomas had chased him through the dark. Captain Thomas found the young deputy was a skilled horseman. He was as good as any of the troopers. Interesting, Thomas thought. The column moved rapidly, stopping only to collect the rangers who remained on a rocking H. As the riders reached the lazy L, they heard the sound of gunfire. Inside the barn, Nate looked into Jack's eyes, and what he saw there was cold, hard pain. Where's Hodgkiss? Nate asked. A blank stare was Jack's only answer. Nate grabbed a handful of Jack's shirt and shook him, but Jack didn't seem to notice. Nate's rage erupted, and he punched Jack and sent him sprawling on the barn floor. Face flushed with fury, fists still clenched. Nate stood over Jack. God damn you, Jack! Nate swore. Tell me you killed that damn thing. Tell me Jimmy didn't just die for nothing. Answer me, by God! I killed it. A small voice escaped Jack's lips. I shot the damn thing between the eyes with a silver bullet and put another in its heart for good measure. Now let's try and stay alive until help gets here. That's better. The growing litter of bodies between the trees and the barn convinced the posse there was too much open ground to cover, and they gave up trying to storm the barn. Hodgkiss's security men recognized the futility of rushing the barn somewhat sooner than the posse. They advised their boss to come up with a new plan. Dawn was breaking, and the congressman's plan was going the way of the night. Any case that might have existed against Hodgkiss had gone up in flames with the House. It was time to get back to Washington and regroup. It would be Carson's word against his, and Nate Carson would not live and testify. There were ways of dealing with Carson from a safe distance. Those ways were every bit as effective as a bullet or a noose. Hodgkiss called Bill Simpson and returned command of the posse to him with the promise of a speedy return of the Rangers. Hodgkiss pulled his men out, leaving a dumbstruck Simpson standing dazed and alone. His command lasted less than an hour. Jason Conroe led the column of cavalry quickly towards the sound of guns. The sight of blue uniformed soldiers on horseback brought an immediate ceasefire, and Bill Simpson went out to meet the column and was startled to see his deputy leading the way. You, and you, come with me, Colonel Wise commanded. Jason, Bill Simpson, and Captain Thomas followed Colonel Wise to the barn. Morgan, Carbon, this is Colonel Wise. We're coming in. Wise motioned for his little band to follow. Inside the barn, Colonel Wise made a formal introductions. Gentlemen, meet Jack Morgan and Nick Corbin of the U.S. Secret Service. If any of you would like to check into it, you will find there were no longer charges against these men. Sheriff, go out and send that posse on home. Tell them take their dead and wounded. My men will take charge of any that you leave behind. In either case, Sheriff, get those men out of here now. Yes, sir, Simpson said and set off on his errand. Captain Thomas, the colonel continued, do you have any men on this field other than those in our column? No, sir, Thomas said. But Mr. Carson. Excellent, Wise cut him off. Then, I suggest you attend strictly to the business of the state of Texas. Dismissed. But Mr. Carson, Thomas tried. Dismissed, Captain, Wise repeated. His icy look told Thomas he was not a man to repeat orders, and there would be no discussion. Let me assure you, Captain, Mr. Carson will be dealt with, Colonel Wise said. Captain Thomas wanted to argue, recognized he was defeated, and stormed on out. He was going to make sure John Hodgkiss paid for this embarrassment. I take it you are the notorious Nate Carson? Colonel Wise addressed Nate.
Yes, sir.
What crime is Captain Thomas so eager to lock you up for?
Oh, they say I shot the sheriff and a Pinkerton man from Washington. Wise glanced around, looking for Jason Conroe.
Where's that deputy? Who told him to leave here?
Sorry, Colonel, Jason called from the doorway.
Deputy, take Mr. Carson into custody.
Pardon, sir, but Texas has no charges against Mr. Carson, Jason answered.
What? Nate asked.
Sheriff Bryan lived long enough to name his killer. I shall speak to Captain Thomas about that, and he will be attending the matter. There are no charges against Mr. Carson. Nate, you're a free man.
Well, that's good enough for me, Colonel Wise said. Corbin, what about that leg?
Missed the bone. Went straight through. I'll be okay. I'll see the local doctor if need be.
Morgan, anything further?
Nothing, sir, except thanks for the rescue.
Doing my duty, boys. Did you take care of yours?
Yes, sir. Our mission was successful. The President will get our report, Jack answered.
Then my duty's done. I'll be returning to Fort Arbuckle. Good day to you, gentlemen.
Colonel Wise turned to leave, and then remembered one last thing, and turned to say,
Oh, by the way, Morgan, nice shiner. Who gave it to you?
I'm afraid, I did, sir, Nate said. The Colonel marched over to Nate and shook his hand.
I knew right off I liked you, Carson. Carry on.
And Colonel Wise returned to his troopers, and the mounted column moved off the way it had come.
Captain Thomas is waiting for me, Jason announced. We're going to arrest Hodgkiss. Y'all want to go along?
No thanks, Nick said. This leg hurts like hell.
I better lay low for now, Jack said.
I'm in, Nate answered. I owe Jimmy and Rafe. Jack started to speak, but Nick shook his head.
Let's ride then,
Jason said.
John Hodgkiss did not intend to face the law in a standoff or a courtroom. The Rangers arrived on a rocking edge to find a ranch house deserted and a pillar of black smoke rising on the northern horizon. They're burning the still. Let's go, boys, Captain Thomas called to his men.
Still?
Nate asked. Yep, Jason explained. Henry and John Jr. were busy building a big distillery down by the river. They planned to buy up the Chickasaw's excess corn and turn it into whiskey with John Sr.'s recipe, float it across the river, and sell it all across the Indian Territory. We think John Sr. found out and was planning to shut the whole thing down.
So, the congressman had him killed?
Right, and took Henry out of the picture for good measure. He must have figured it would be better to go into business for himself.
How did you find out?
Nate asked. My men wounded a few of Hodgkiss's boys down by the river last night, and we convinced them to talk, Thomas added. When the Rangers arrived at the still, it was fully engulfed in flames. Not much in the way of evidence remained, but there were two trails leading away from the still. The largest group rode east towards Colbert's Ferry. A smaller bunch, only two sets of tracks, headed off towards the southwest. Thomas sent his rangers on the track headed east, and Captain Thomas, Nate and Jason followed the tracks headed back towards the Lazy L. They covered half a mile when gunfire erupted to the east. Hodgkiss's boys have decided to put up a fight, Thomas observed. You think Hodgkiss is with them? Jason asked. Do you? Thomas replied. Not for a minute, Jason said. Captain Thomas held up a hand and the trio reined in their horses. He pointed to the southwest. There they are, Thomas said. Headed straight for your place, Nate. Let's stay back and see how this plays out. And the three slowed their horses, but kept Hodgkiss in sight. The congressman, accompanied by his Negro driver, were headed for the Lazy L. The pair dismounted a quarter mile from the barn and moved in on foot. Nate and his companions did the same. When Hodgkiss and his driver entered the barn, Nate broke into a run. And Nick Corbin lay propped up on Raffay's old bunk, tipping a recovered jug of Hodgkiss's lightning. Jack pulled a stool next to the bed and began setting up supplies to clean Nick's wound. Nick took another pull on the jug and had a little trouble deciding where the jug went next. His head swayed on a neck that had lost the will and the means to support it. The jug slid off the bed but remained hooked in Nick's fingers. "I'd say you've had enough," Jack said. "Never," Nick slurred. "Give me that jug before you spill it." Jack pulled the jug free from Nick's clutches and moved it beyond his reach. "You shot him, didn't you?" Nick slurred. "And you're drunk," Jack said. "You still shot him." "Shot who?" "Don't give me that, Jack. You know damn well who. You shot Jimmy." Jack said nothing. That drop of his head and refusal to meet Nick's eyes was answer enough. "You didn't have a choice." "So I keep telling myself," Jack said. "You didn't. I saw his leg. Harmon got to him, didn't he?" "Yes," Jack whispered. "Now leave it alone." "I will if you will." "Does Nate know?" "No, I don't think so. Anyway, and that's the way it's gonna stay." "All right. Now, get them britches off and let's get this over with," Jack ordered. Nick launched into an impressive string of swearing as he worked his pants over his leg and down around the tops of his boots. "Now, this is gonna hurt to you a hell of a lot worse than it is to me," Jack promised. Jack washed away the dried blood that covered the wound and made sure the bleeding had stopped. He was about to pour water into the wound when an ominous voice spoke from behind him. "Messieurs Morgan and Corbin, we meet again," said John Hodgkiss. "Jack, let me see your hands. Slowly. Jack, very slowly." Jack raised his hands above his head and turned to face Hodgkiss. The congressman held a revolver pointed at Jack's head. "Now, if you'll be so good as to drop your gun onto the floor and kick it over here." Jack complied. Hodgkiss retrieved the weapon. The black man gathered the weapon up and turned to throw the gun out of the barn. He was checked by the arrival of Nate, Jason, and Captain Thomas. "Mr. Hodgkiss, we have company," the driver's deep bass voice said. Hodgkiss took a step back from the doorway to cover the new arrivals. "That's far enough, gentlemen," Hodgkiss said. "Very talented of you to find us, Mr. Carson. I'm glad you and Mr. Conroe decided to join us. It will save me the trouble of disposing you later." "You better hope your man there is faster than those you sent to kill Sam Bryan," Nate said. "Oh, you'll find Mr. Humphreys here immeasurably faster," Hodgkiss sneered. "But that's not where his true talent lies. I was about to ask him to demonstrate that talent for your friends, and I think you all will enjoy this. Mr. Humphreys, if you will." "With pleasure, Mr. Hodgkiss." The tall black man hunched his shoulders and shook from head to toe. He tore at his clothes and began to growl. His long fingers shortened and contorted, and heavy claws replaced his manicured nails. A hump grew across his shoulders, arching them forward, and Humphreys continued to rip at his clothes until he tore them away, and thick, coarse hair covered his body, and a long tail curled up behind him. Humphrey's head rocked from side to side in time to snapping bone as his jaws grew long and pointed. Humphrey's audience was thunderstruck. "Gentlemen, the new and better werewolf. No moonlight needed and twice as vicious." Hodgkiss gestured towards the snarling, slobbering creature. "Judging by the look of our local lawman and that river of piss running down Captain Thomas's leg, I'd say this is their first look at A werewolf. How delightful. I'd venture to say the rest of you have never seen one in daylight. Rest assured, gentlemen, it's your last look. Mr. Humphreys, kill them all. Run! Nate yelled at a lawman, and Jason's feet found wings. Captain Thomas was not so fortunate. He could not turn his eyes away from the monstrosity before him. The werewolf's clawed hand swung at Captain Thomas. The ranger's head rolled across the floor and came to a rest at Hodgkiss's feet. Nate hammered the creature across the shoulders with a length of Raffay's stove wood. The blow drove it back momentarily. Nate searched frantically for the silver bullets in his gun belt. John Hodgkiss used a diversion to run for his horse. Jack dove at the fleeing congressman, and Hodgkiss wheeled and fired. The shot went high and Jack hit him in the legs, and Hodgkiss fell hard and kicked Jack in the face. Jack's nose shattered and blood streamed down his face, and Hodgkiss was back on his feet. He fired point blank at Morgan's chest, but the hammer fell with a hollow click on an empty cylinder, and Hodgkiss ran for the horses. The werewolf regained his balance and clawed at Nate's head. The swing went wide and Nate landed a second blow against Humphrey's ribs that sent the werewolf stumbling over Jack and crashing to the floor. Jack rolled to safety, holding his bleeding nose. Nate brought the stove wood down a third time, intending to crush Humphrey's head, but the creature was ready. He had caught the club in a clawed hand and ripped it away from Nate's grasp, and Nate backed away, frantically searching for a weapon. He found the silver bullet in his belt, and he continued to retreat while trying to get the round loaded. Nate chambered around and snapped off a shot at the creature's chest. The werewolf was fast, unearthly fast. It spun left and Nate's shot went wide, and a vicious laugh croaked from Humphrey's distorted vocal cords. The creature caught Nate by the shirt and lifted him off of his feet. The werewolf's jaws opened and its head drew back to strike. An explosion rocked the barn, followed by the smell of gunpowder and a burning hair. A frothy, wet mass smacked Nate in the face, and he heard a loud thud and something fell hard. The hand holding Nate relaxed and then dropped him, and Nate's eyes were full of blood. He wiped at them, but his hands were covered with blood and the same black, gelatinous slime that streaked his face. Nate grabbed a handful of straw from a nearby stool and wiped his hands and face, and the first thing he saw, clearly, was the headless body of Hodgkiss's driver lying on the barn floor. In the doorway beyond, Nick Corbin held Jimmy's smoking shotgun. "Silver shot," Nick smiled. "Took his damn head off." "It sure as hell did," Nate agreed, and the pair began to laugh. John Hodgkiss spurred his horse. Humphreys would clean up the mess in Texoma. Hodgkiss only needed time to let things return to normal. Texas had a way of settling back into its rhythm quickly. Old sins were not forgotten in Texoma, but they were readily consigned to silence in the name of the community. Hodgkiss would ride through Indian territory to McAllister, and Humphreys knew to meet him there, and he could have money sent from his office to the Indian agency, and together he and Humphreys would take the train back to Washington, where everything could easily be denied. Simpson could be counted on to handle things in Texoma, and with his guidance from Washington, there would be plenty of evidence for Simpson to find and lay all the blame for everything on the Klan and its leaders on the Lazy L. He still had his father's recipe. He could rebuild. Legitimate sales in Texas would be very profitable, and sales of the raw stuff to the Indians would be even more lucrative. It could still be done. Time was all he needed. And once across the river, he was home free. Hodgkiss topped the hill and saw the river sparkling in the sun. It was downhill all the way. He threw one last glance back, and things were going to work out after all. He was halfway down the slope to the river when riders came over the hill behind him. They wore long white robes and pointed hoods. Hodgkiss's heart leapt into his throat, and it was going to be a chase after all. he dug the spurs into his mount. "They'll never catch me," Hodgkiss gloated. Terror froze the congressman. He hauled back on the reins as half a dozen riders emerged from the trees ahead. The hooded riders filled into the road between Hodgkiss and the river. The riders slowly closed around Hodgkiss, forcing him into their midst. "Kill them all? Why, John? What a poor way to treat old friends." The leader pulled back his hood, and John Hodgkiss stared into the angry face of Jason Conroe. New Year's Day, 1871, was cold and clear. The sun was high overhead, but it didn't have the strength to warm things much. A steady north wind rattled through the bare branches and swirled around the eaves. Nate looked out of his window to see a cardinal perched on his new front porch rail. As they have a way of doing, things were getting back to normal. This new house wasn't as big as the original, but it was warm and sturdy. Jack and Nick had stayed on to see it rebuilt. Nick spent his days shouting directions as he hobbled around on his wounded leg. Jack worked hard, but remained strangely quiet. Something of the old Jack Morgan's jovial good nature was lost in the fight. Nate wondered if it had anything to do with Jimmy's death. Jack had taken quite a shine to the kid. Many of the town folks, even some members of the posse that burned the place, pitched in to rebuild the Lazy L. Nate had won at last. It was a hollow victory. The Lazy L was empty without Rafe and Jimmy. On a grassy hill down by the river, 2 small white crosses marked their final resting place. Nate had taken to sitting beside the markers and watching the river run flow. Last week, Jason Conroe had dropped by to let Nate know Bill Simpson had made a sudden decision to leave Texoma. Jason inherited the job of sheriff, at least until the next election. There was still no word as to the whereabouts of John Hodgkiss, and search parties were unable to locate a trace of the congressman, and it was presumed he had escaped the arms of justice. The governor announced he planned to appoint a replacement soon. Jason urged Nate to offer himself for the job. Nate politely but firmly declined. Nate rose from his chair to get a better look at his tiny, crimson visitor and saw a carriage coming up the road. A short, round man in a derby hat was driving, and seated beside him was a woman dressed in black. The driver brought the carriage to a halt at Nate's door and climbed on down. His face was flushed and his laboured breathing visible in the cold air. He walked quickly around the rig and offered his hand to the woman. Nate opened his door and stepped onto the porch. "Yeah, come in here, out of the cold," Nate called. He seated a pair at his table and busied himself placing steaming mugs of coffee before his guests. The man drank heartily from the hot liquid, but his female companion seemed content just to warm her hands. "Mr. Carson," she began, "my name is Ellen O'Brien. Sam Bryan was my husband." "My sympathies, ma'am. Sam was a good man." "Thank you, Mr. Carson." "Nate, ma'am, please." "Nate, then," she said and managed a bit of a smile. "This is my brother, Jess White." "Glad to meet you," Nate said as the two shook hands. "Same here, Mr. Carson," Jess said with a nod. "What can I do for y'all? You come quite a way on a mighty cold day." "Well, Mr. Carson, Nate, I'm not sure how to ask this except straight out." "Always the best way, ma'am." "Okay then. I want to know about my husband. About how he died." "You mean did I do it?" "Oh my, no. Not at all. Forgive my manners. I'm just not good at this. I know for a fact you didn't kill Sam. He told me. But, well, you were there." "Yes, ma'am, I was there." Nate hung his head. "And had I known being there would mean the death of a man like your husband, I never would have come to town. I brought the monster down on us all." "I don't believe that for a minute. Men like John Hodgkiss need provocation to evil. Nate, my Sam was a lawman,
He took a lot of pride in being someone folks around here could turn to. The idea that an honest man like you wouldn't come to him for help, it would have wounded him worse than those guns. As for monsters, I think they are always among us. They only need honest men to be idle.
I can't say that I feel much like a honest man these days. My secrets got people killed. I suppose you're right, though. About Sam, that is. He was a man you could trust.
Please, Nate, tell me what happened in that office. I need to know. I keep having these strange dreams. Maybe knowing will put them all to rest.
Eddie Bryan laid a soft hand atop of Nate's chapped, weathered ones. Her eyes met his, and Nate saw a deep sorrow there, but not doubt or fear. I'll tell you whatever you'd like to know, but knowing doesn't always help. I came to town that night to tell Sam that my friend, Rafe, had been killed, like the men of the Rockin' H. I knew Hodgkiss did it, and I was sure the congressman knew all about it. I wanted to tell Sam to watch out for Hodgkiss and his men. I also wanted Sam to know that the men staying with me were innocent. I hoped Sam would help head off the fight that was brewing. Anyway, Hodgkiss showed up with that Pinkerton fellow, and they began pressuring Sam to arrest my friends. I told the Pinkerton man if he tried to force his way onto my place to make his arrests, the blood would be shed. Sam stood with me. I guess that gave the Pinkerton man some cause to doubt what he had been told, and his hesitation spooked Hodgkiss. Hodgkiss then ordered his men to start shooting, and they shot Sam before I could stop them. Nate looked into Ellie's eyes again. There was a strength in her eyes Nate was not quite sure he could match. I wanted to stay and help Sam. I wanted to stay and fight it out right there and then, but Sam told me to get on out. I wish now I had stayed. The last came out in a whisper.
There was nothing you could have done,
Ellie said, and tears began to flow down her cheeks. They sat in silence for several minutes, lost in sorrows that were too fresh to show any signs of healing.
We really must go now,
Ellie said at last.
Thank you, Nate, for telling me about Sam. It means a great deal to me to know he died doing what he knew was right.
Nate escorted his guest to the carriage and helped Ellie aboard. He looked up into her eyes again. What will you do now, Mrs. Bryan? He asked.
I don't know. I suppose I'll pick up what's left and do the best I can. Isn't that what good soldiers do?
Then they were gone the way they had come. The carriage vanished over the hill towards Texoma. After a time, the cold reminded Nate to step back inside. He resumed his seat by the window and looked out over the lazy owl. He soon found himself wondering, once again, if he could pick up the pieces, and just when the wolves would stop howling. Wow, 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 wow. Certainly another one. Wow. Absolutely riveting, chest-pounding storyline there from the incredible Jack LaFountain. Don't forget, guys, you can purchase this plus many more books over on Jack's incredible Amazon store. I'll leave the link to that in the description box below. You can treat yourself to a terrific novel. Of course, a huge thank you to Jack for once again sending over his incredible work. It really is such an honour to narrate such fine penmanship. And I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I. Well, guys and girls, another one bites the dust. Please, of course, do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. Why not hashtag Team Fear and DMT's Cryptid Crew. If you're an aspiring writer or would just like to have a crack at things, why not get in touch with myself at the usual email as on screen, which is dmtforesterfear@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Well, I hope everybody's well and happy this week, and are getting stuck into whatever it is that you do, whether it's studying or work. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.